The diner sat just off the highway in a small Arizona town, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the waitresses knew most customers by name. Sunlight slipped through the wide glass windows, falling across cracked vinyl booths and a long counter lined with spinning stools. At the corner booth near the window sat an 81-year-old man named Harold Miller. His back was straight despite his age, his posture shaped by years of military discipline. A faded veteran's cap rested beside his plate, and a folded newspaper lay open in front of him. Harold had survived a lifetime most people could barely imagine. He had served his country when he was young, seen places he never talked about, and lost friends whose names still echoed in his dreams. Now, his world was simpler. Morning coffee, toast with a little butter. The quiet comfort of routine. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the mug, but his eyes were steady, thoughtful, and kind. The calm of the diner broke when the door swung open hard enough to rattle the bell above it. A heavy-set man in his 30s staggered inside, his boots loud against the tiled floor. He smelled of alcohol and anger. His voice filled the room as he cursed at his phone, complaining about money, work, and people who had no respect. Several customers glanced at each other, uneasy, then quickly looked away. The man dropped into a booth across the aisle from Harold, slamming his fist on the table to call the waitress. She approached carefully, her polite smile tight with concern. The thug snapped at her, ordering food and mocking the slow pace. Harold watched quietly, his jaw tightening. He had seen bullies before, on playgrounds, in barracks, and on streets far from home. When the man's shouting grew louder, Harold leaned slightly forward and spoke in a calm, gentle voice. "Son," he said, "there are families here. Could you lower your voice a bit?" The diner froze. The thug slowly turned, eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. He stood up, towering over the elderly veteran. "You talking to me, old man?" he sneered. A few people shifted in their seats, but no one spoke. Fear hung in the air, thick and heavy. Harold met the man's gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult him. "Just asking for some respect," he replied. The thug laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Respect," he repeated. Then, without warning, he slapped Harold across the face. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Harold's glasses flew off, skidding across the floor. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The waitress covered her mouth. The thug smirked, proud of himself, then sat back down as if nothing had happened. Harold stayed still for a moment. His cheek burned, but worse was the sting of humiliation. Slowly, carefully, he bent down, picked up his glasses, and wiped them with a trembling hand. He said nothing. He simply sat back in his booth, dignity intact. Just then, the bell above the diner door rang again. The bell above the diner door rang sharply, cutting through the thick silence that followed the slap. Every head turned at once. A tall man stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the room. He wore a worn leather jacket, dark jeans, and heavy boots dusted from the road. His hair was tied back, and his eyes were alert, scanning the diner with quiet awareness. Behind him, two more men entered, then another. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't laugh. They simply stood there, calm but solid, like a wall that had suddenly appeared. The thug glanced toward the door, irritation still on his face, but it quickly shifted. His eyes caught the patches on the leather jackets, symbols known even to those who pretended not to notice such things. His confidence wavered, just slightly. The tall man's gaze settled on the corner booth by the window. His expression changed instantly. "Dad," he said, his voice low but full of concern. Harold looked up, stunned. For a second, he thought his ears were playing tricks on him. Then he recognized the face. The older version of the boy he had raised, the son who had chosen the road, the bike, and a life far different from his own. "Tom," Harold replied softly. Tom crossed the diner in long strides. The other bikers stayed near the door, not blocking it, not threatening anyone, just watching. Tom slid into the booth beside his father, gently touching his shoulder. His eyes moved to Harold's red cheek, then to the glasses clutched in his hand. "What happened?" Tom asked quietly. Harold hesitated. He had faced worse than this in his life. "It's nothing," he said. "Just a misunderstanding." Tom stood up slowly. He turned, not rushing, not showing anger, yet the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His eyes locked onto the thug, who suddenly found the tabletop very interesting. Tom walked over and stopped beside the thug's booth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. "You slapped my father," he said calmly. The thug swallowed hard. Up close, Tom's calm was more frightening than shouting. I didn't know," the thug muttered. "He shouldn't have. He's 81, Tom interrupted, his tone steady. "And he asked you politely." The diner was so quiet that the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter sounded loud. Everyone watched, waiting for violence, for chaos, for something explosive. But it never came. Tom leaned slightly closer. "You're going to apologize," he said. "Right now." The thug's face flushed. Pride fought fear for a brief moment. Fear won. He stood up awkwardly and turned toward Harold. "I'm sorry," he said, barely above a whisper. "I was out of line." Harold looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Apology accepted," he said simply. The thug grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the diner, the bell ringing wildly behind him. Tom returned to his father's booth and sat down again. "You okay?" he asked. Harold managed a small smile. "I am now." Around them, the diner slowly breathed again. Conversations resumed, softer than before. Respect had returned. Not through force, but through quiet strength. For a few moments after the thug left, no one spoke. The diner felt different now, calmer, as if a storm had passed without breaking anything. The waitress finally approached Harold's booth, her eyes gentle. "Sir, can I get you anything?" she asked. "On the house." Harold smiled politely. "Just some fresh coffee, please." She nodded and hurried away, clearly relieved. Tom watched his father closely as he adjusted his glasses and folded his newspaper. Seeing him like this, older, slower, yet still unbroken, stirred something deep inside Tom. He hadn't planned on stopping at this diner. It was chance, or maybe fate, that had brought him here at the exact right moment. "You shouldn't be sitting alone in places like this," Tom said quietly, not scolding, just worried. Harold chuckled softly. "I've been alone in far worse places than this," he replied. "Besides, most people are decent." Tom nodded, though his eyes drifted briefly toward the door, as if making sure the thug wouldn't return. The other bikers remained by the entrance, respectful and silent. They hadn't ordered food, hadn't caused a scene. They were there only because Tom was there. The waitress returned with coffee and a slice of pie. "Thank you for your service," she said to Harold, her voice sincere. A few customers nearby nodded in agreement. One man even stood and tipped his cap. Harold looked slightly embarrassed but grateful. Tom leaned back in the booth. "We were passing through," he explained. "Headed north. When I saw you through the window," he shook his head. "Guess I was meant to stop." Harold studied his son's face. Time had changed him. Hard lines, road-worn skin, but the eyes were the same. "You chose your own path," Harold said calmly. "I never blamed you for that." Tom swallowed. "I know, but I always hoped you were proud of me. In your own way." Harold reached across the table and placed his hand over Tom's. His grip was weak, but his meaning was strong. "A man is judged by how he treats those who can't defend themselves," he said. "Today, I saw that you understand that." Tom looked away, emotion threatening to show. He stood up and signaled to the bikers. They relaxed slightly, some even smiling at the sight of the old veteran enjoying his pie. Before leaving, Tom turned to the diner. "My father deserves respect," he said simply. "So does everyone here." No threat, no warning, just a statement of fact. As they walked out, the bell rang again, softer this time. The diner returned to its normal rhythm, forks clinking, coffee pouring, quiet conversation. But something had changed. People sat a little straighter. They looked at Harold with new admiration. Harold finished his coffee slowly, savoring the warmth. He folded his newspaper, placed his veteran's cap back on his head, and stood up. As he left the diner, the sunlight felt brighter. He hadn't needed revenge. He hadn't needed violence. All he needed was dignity, and the reminder that respect, once demanded calmly, has a way of returning on its own.